Preserved in the dry environments of desert cave complexes, we find texts that have survived intact for nearly 2 millennia. Among these is the Diamond Sūtra, a foundational document of ancient Eastern philosophy. It is also one of the most logically perplexing texts ever written. The entire document relies on a single, highly repetitive dialectical formula. The A the Buddha speaks of is not A, therefore it is called A. For centuries, scholars have treated this triadic structure, assertion, negation, and reaffirmation, as a rhetorical device. It is typically explained as a deliberate paradox designed to break standard conceptual thinking. But within the conformal field theory framework of the E8 lattice, this repetitive logic takes on a different function. In this framework, the text is treated as a topological error-correcting code, an algorithmic loop designed to prevent the quantum state of the observer from decohering into reified classical objects. In a previous look at the Heart Sutra, we established a static holographic boundary identity. Form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. While the Heart Sutra describes reality's baseline ground state, the Diamond Sutra is the active protocol required to maintain it. Without an active corrective mechanism, a localized observer's state begins crystallizing into rigid, independent structures. The Diamond Sutra is the sweeping protocol that actively dissolves those false classical objects back into fluid, flowing geometry. Within this model, understanding reality requires more than knowing its ground state. It requires executing the mathematical protocol that stabilizes the mind against structural illusions. Classical logic and physics rest on the law of identity, the axiom that an object strictly equals itself, or A equals A. This law relies on associativity, the mathematical rule that grouping properties or propositions together doesn't change the underlying truth value of the result. At the fundamental level of the E8 framework, this rule fails. Observables exist within a non-associative Jordan algebra, where measurement groupings actively alter the outcome. Because the associator is non-zero, a localized vector's identity fluctuates based on its surrounding measurement context. No isolated object possesses a fixed, context-independent truth value, a mathematical result that aligns with the concept of dependent origination. Because A does not strictly equal A in this algebra, classical Boolean logic is insufficient, mandating a new logical corrective. We can visualize this corrective as a three-stage mathematical pipeline, the dialectical operator. This operator maps the specific phrasing of the Diamond Sutra. The first phrase, the A the Buddha speaks of, corresponds to the pipeline's first stage, projection. This is when an observer isolates a single quantum eigenstate from the visible sector. Cognitively, this is reification, mistaking a projection for an independent, self-existing reality. The text counters with its second phrase, is not A. Mathematically, this is trace annihilation. Here, the nilpotent BRST operator Q sweeps the state, identifying the vector as having zero Jordan trace and stripping away the gauge redundancy mistaken for solid substance. Is not A is the literal algebraic cutting away of the Q-exact illusion that an object exists independently. The dialectic resolves with the final phrase, therefore it is called A, representing the final stage, cohomological reaffirmation. The object is recovered, but not as the rigid, classical vector the observer originally projected. The state is now an equivalence class, a topological invariant in the physical Hilbert space. It can be named and discussed conventionally, but its existence is understood as topological rather than substance-based. This system operates through a property called nilpotency, where the operator Q squared equals 0. Because the operator is nilpotent, the diamond only needs to cut once. Gauge redundancies are annihilated in a single sweep, leaving no residual illusion. Within a non-associative universe, this three-step formula is the logically consistent way to measure and name a localized state without generating paradoxes. Moving from the single equation to the entire text, the Diamond Sutra is divided into 32 sections. This count corresponds to the 32 elements of the Trigento-Duonionic basis algebra. The text maps these sections to specific algebraic sectors, like the peaceful and wrathful deformations of the state space. Each section applies the dialectical operator to one specific basis element. The repetitive structure represents a complete algorithmic sweep required to individually process and purify every dimension of the observer's reality. This code executes on a genus 10 Riemann surface, which is defined by 20 distinct homology generators. When an observer forces classical reification onto this geometry, errors manifest as trivial loops. These loops threaten to collapse the surface into a flat plane. The 32-fold sweep acts as a continuous topological parity check, identifying these loops and annihilating them to maintain modular invariance across all 20 generators. This model inherits its scale from the 51.9 giga-electron-volt boundary established in previous papers, requiring no additional free parameters. The Diamond Sūtra functions as an Octonionian surface code, a protocol that continuously stabilizes the mind against the physical decoherence of reality.